Dr. Martin-Immanuel Bittner is Chief Executive of Arctoris, the drug discovery platform company that he co-founded in Oxford in 2016. Martin graduated as a medical doctor from the University of Freiburg in Germany, followed by his DPhil in oncology as a Rhodes Scholar at the University of Oxford. He has extensive research experience covering both clinical trials and preclinical drug discovery, and is an active member of several leading cancer research organizations, including EACR, AACR, and ESTRO. In recognition of his research achievements, he was elected a member of the Young Academy for the German National Academy of Sciences and of a Sigma Phi. Okay, Martin, I will hand over to you.
I'm just going to give kind of a very brief kind of 2 or 3 words regarding kind of my own kind of background, in addition to what has just been said as to how it relates to this webinar. So over the past few years, I think what all of us have been witnessing is that the drug discovery ecosystem is undergoing quite a bit of change, and that we're seeing that new companies and new players have been emerging within drug discovery. And the purpose kind of for kind of my talk today is very much to elucidate kind of some of these trends a bit further, some of the players that have been emerging, some of the technologies that have been growing kind of in importance kind of since then. And what I would like to develop over the next kind of plus minus 20-25 minutes is a bit of a deeper understanding regarding which processes really shape kind of the drug discovery ecosystem kind of moving forward, and which companies kind of we think are going to play kind of an important role in that. So as I said, kind of I'm very glad to be here today. And as I mentioned, kind of so the goal for today is really kind of going through kind of some of these key trends that are shaping kind of drug discovery as we're moving forward, and to share kind of a few kind of extra thoughts on this emerging space of data-driven drug discovery. Of course, kind of all of us are kind of completely familiar with the drug discovery process, so we don't have to spend kind of much time here. But what I think is very important to highlight is that the entire drug discovery process takes years, takes a lot of money, but above all requires a lot of very specialist players and specialist expertise in these various parts of the process. It's something very, very different to work in, for example, target ID or target validation, as opposed to trying to recruit patients for a clinical trial or moving into leveraging real-world evidence in order kind of to support applications for drugs being approved or not. So this really is an environment where there's a lot of specialist knowledge required, which really is very different depending on which phase you're in. And if we just look at the discovery phase kind of in a bit more depth, we can see that even within that phase, within these first 2 or 3 years, there's so many different processes, from again, target ID to developing the assays, so then moving through kind of the various processes until we arrive at the preclinical candidate, which can then be subjected to IND filing and be used as starting material kind of for a clinical trial. And the interesting question is, which of these stages can technology potentially help? Can help with, and technology can help either kind of accelerate or increase the chance of success of. Because one of the biggest problems, as all of us are familiar with, is that right now drug discovery is not only very expensive, but it also has a very low success rate. And that is something we as an industry will need to think about and need to address. Obviously, within drug discovery, we have all of the players we're familiar with: academic centers, biotech companies, pharma companies, as well as regulators, CROs, patients, obviously. However, what I would like to show over the next few slides is that this ecosystem that all of us are very familiar with, that all of us know as our kind of default map, is something which right now is undergoing change. And so what I've done is I've reconfigured this map to say, why don't we look at drug discovery evolution in a way that we try to use kind of a matrix where we look at the adoption of automation and the adoption of AI, data mining, machine learning as 2 metrics, and we see kind of what happens when we group companies kind of into this matrix. And what we see is that most of the players we just looked at the slide before, the traditional biotech companies, pharma companies, CROs, end up in the bottom left-hand corner, where the degree of automation overall, apart from high-throughput screening, is quite limited, and where also the use of artificial intelligence is something which is being considered, where teams are being built, but where the organization as a whole is not necessarily AI or machine learning driven or powered. And what we've seen over the past few years is the emergence of AI drug discovery companies, such as in silico medicine, Benevolent, Atomwise, and many others. And these companies are AI first companies. They've been developing advanced algorithms from machine learning, deep learning, and other areas, which they use to, for example, identify novel targets. Benevolent is doing a lot to do virtual screening, such as Atomwise, or to use generative models to come up with novel molecules, such as in silico medicine. And at the very same time, there's been an entirely independent trend, which has been leveraging automation and robotics within a life sciences and drug discovery context. And those would be companies in synthetic biology, as well as the cloud laboratories that use robotics and robotic labs as a service model for other companies. And what we believe is one of the core trends that over the past few years has become more and more clearly visible is data-powered or data-driven drug discovery. And the companies we see in that space is predominantly Recursion Pharmaceuticals, in situ, as well as ourselves, where the core idea behind these three companies is that instead of seeing automation and seeing data science / machine learning applications as several entities, we believe there is a need to look at those in a far more synergistic and integrated way. So what these companies have been doing and what we're also doing is to build robotic laboratories, to build lab facilities that very heavily rely on automation with the goal to generate large amounts of highly structured, annotated, machine learning ready data sets, which can then be analyzed using different flavors of machine learning. So it's very much this synergy between the automation, the robotics, the wet lab side, and the dry lab side, which powers these companies. And I think what kind of supports kind of this general trend is that AI applications themselves as a category of its own has been on the rise for a few years now. So this would be kind of a list of many of the areas that we've seen in the previous slides, where drug discovery processes are broken down into parts of their components. And we can see that in all of these different categories, there are AI-driven, AI-powered companies that work on those. And this is taken from a very good list, kind of Simon Smith has been updating it kind of for the longest time, working on a categorization and kind of a listing of the different AI drug discovery companies, which I think is a very helpful kind of publication and a very helpful kind of list. And the list is very much in tune with what our own analysis has shown us, in that the number of companies, AI drug discovery companies, having been founded over time rises very sharply. And especially over the past kind of five, 6 years, we've seen a tremendous increase in the number of AI drug discovery companies that have been started, and that, of course, with sufficient time kind of on the market, are now also starting to bring AI-derived molecules kind of into the clinical setting, which is, of course, kind of a very exciting step, because in the end, proof is in the pudding. And even if the platform does sound very interesting and very exciting, what you want is that you want drugs moving into clinical trials, showing reduction in time needed, reduction in cost, and kind of an increase in confidence in the daily success rate when bringing these drugs further forward. But just to say, kind of, we're definitely seeing kind of this increased number of companies being founded, and we're also seeing a significant increase in the investment in the AI drug discovery space, in this case, kind of $1 million per year in AI drug discovery. At the same time, I think it's also very important to see why has this trend been happening, and what is the underlying motivation for this rise of technology-driven, AI-driven drug discovery. And that is where I think it's important to think back as to what are some of the key challenges that we face as an industry. I think the first one is there is always more to do than one has kind of the time and the budget for. Lab time is expensive. Running experiments takes a lot of time. It also means that a given team is hardly ever going to be able to work on all of these promising hypotheses, and bottlenecks always threaten to stall or to delay kind of progress in important programs. And that is very, very closely linked with which is a slightly provocative statement, but that we firmly believe that lab work itself is not what scientists should be doing, at least not as their main occupation. Scientists are supposed to think, read, hypothesize, develop new ideas. Instead, we find that too many scientists spend 60, 70, 80% of their time doing manual cell culture. Processes that could very easily be taken over by machinery and thereby liberate scientists' time to actually spend more of their attention and spend more of their waking hours with driving projects forward on an intellectual level. And finally, again, closely linked, we know that there are massive issues with data and data quality within drug discovery. This is based on the seminal papers that Bayer and Amgen have been working on over the past few years, which show very clearly that the rate of reproducibility from peer-reviewed published studies is dismal. And at the same time, it is a problem which extends beyond the academic setting, in that in general, data structure, data annotation in a drug discovery setting is oftentimes unsatisfactory, especially when looking at AI-driven drug discovery, where the quality of the input data is even more important, as machines learn with data being structured, annotated, and with different data sets being able to be pooled, so that you can suddenly make conclusions, not just based on one data set, but on different data sets. But of course, that only works if the data can actually be pooled and can actually be put together, and that requires a certain amount of standardization and of data capture, which right now is very difficult to find. And what these issues result in is that we see that the overall pharmaceutical R&D productivity has been on decline for a very long time. Famous Ürüm's law, looking at drugs brought to market per research $1 billion spent, and we can see that the productivity goes down and the costs go up. And but in our opinion, one of the key challenges is that right now, if we look at the data being used to drive these decisions, to drive which program to pursue, which target to work on, which small molecule to take forward, right now this data is normally built on isolated, small, unlinked sets. Methods and protocols are normally ambiguous. To give you an example, a scientific protocol might say, mix the sample. But mixing is something which can happen in many different ways. It could be shaking or stirring or vortexing. It could be for half a minute, could be for 5 minutes. It could be at room temperature, whatever that is. It could be on ice. It's very, very difficult to compare data and to make sense of data that comes from such varying protocols and conditions. And that means we deal with data and data formats which are normally not standardized, at least not in the discovery phase. And that is where we think it is extremely important to reconsider not just how we analyze data using, for example, machine learning, but also what type of data we use in the first place. And that is where we're advocating for data which is more fully captured, which is generated using standardized protocols, where, for example, in the story of mentioning before, where the protocol says mix the sample, this is being defined. It's defined as 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes at 60 rotations per second at 22 degrees centigrade. And all of these parameters are being detailed, captured, transparently logged, and made accessible. So it's far more about running experiments in a fashion where each individual step is fully characterized, as well as captured and then kind of made accessible. And what that gives us is, it gives us databases where data can actually be used, where data can be taken from different experimentators from different time points, and you still can compare something that was done today and something that was done 3 months ago, because it was done using the exact same protocol, which is actually a robotic script and not just kind of the recollection of, I think I did an overnight incubation. So it's very much a complete reversal of how we currently think about data and how we have to think about data in order to make AI-driven drug discovery and data-driven drug discovery a reality. And that is where the combination with robotics really comes into play. Because if we think of how these two actually work with one another and synergize with one another, we can see that robotics allows us to generate data with strict protocol adherence, where reproducibility is no longer theoretical, but actually practically achieved. Where data is captured, especially valuable metadata, temperature, humidity, CO2 concentration, all of these parameters can then be captured throughout the experiment. And of course, it also makes it easier to actually verify reagents, verify cell lines when everything is barcoded, when it's much more difficult kind of to mix up wells or to confuse kind of labels, because everything is logged, audited, and transparently logged. And the synergy really comes from the fact that the inputs, which are then being used for AI drug discovery programs, are actually standardized, validated, mineable data. And so where that leads us is that drug discovery can suddenly become far more real time than it currently is. So instead of generating data and a year later someone accesses a repository and uses some of that data, we can have data being generated, analyzed the next day, and another batch of data generated just another day later. So it's a far more iterative process where data generation, data analysis really go hand in hand. And that is something which, especially when looking at the precision medicine that all of us kind of are aiming kind of to achieve, is an even more important challenge that we need to overcome. Because if we want to move away from having one blockbuster drug that works for 1 million patients, and if we want to move far more towards more drugs being developed, where each drug is customized, personalized, individualized for a certain indication, a certain mutational status, then we need to be able to scale drug discovery to a degree that we can bring 10 times the number of drugs to market that we can right now. And that will require us to rethink the way we not only approach data analysis, but also data in the first place. And that is where we think that some of the companies that I've been mentioning before, Recursion and 𝘋𝘗𝘓, ourselves, really can play a particularly exciting role, because these are the companies where the synergy between the robotics and the AI has already seen some very interesting first results. And Recursion, I think, is a particularly nice example, where especially after their IPO and with the recent announcement of their massive collaboration with Roche, Genentech, and Bayer, we have seen how their approach of using robotics to generate imaging data and machine learning to analyze this imaging data really seems to be a very promising one. And another company based in the US, this case in California, in 𝘋𝘗𝘓, also uses a very similar approach, in that their automation has been focused primarily in the neurospace, where they're doing a lot of work in target discovery, again with this combination of laboratory being heavily automated, plus a machine learning team that then works with the data they generate. And again, interesting partnerships, also one with collaboration with GSK as well. So definitely companies which have been doing extremely well. I'm not going to go into any detail regarding our own basically technical focus. The only thing I do want to share is what our general approach is. It's within just this slide, because we believe that it's extremely important to think about what are the key metrics we want to improve on. And for us is we want to be faster compared to standard, and we want to have a higher chance of success, because currently 5% or less really makes it extremely difficult for biotech companies to really have a meaningful impact on patients' lives when 19 out of 20 drug discovery programs never make it to market. And for us, that is leveraging end-to-end automation from targets to hits to leads to candidate, where the generation of these very rich, robust data sets really takes center stage. And one of the benefits of automation, as we were mentioning before, is that you can suddenly generate far more data compared to industry standard, because you can capture the relevant metadata. You can run kinetic assays when normally manually you would only use a single time point. And you can combine your technology with human experts who bring the experience, who bring the ingenuity and creativity that only humans possess. And for us, that really is reflected in a reduction of cycle times that we can achieve in moving from hits to lead, or through lead optimization, with fewer cycles, where each cycle is then also reduced in the time it takes, because we can move through testing, analysis, the next design phase in a short amount of time. And I think this is a very nice illustration where the Mona Lisa moves from being a low data density, low fidelity picture, very pixelated and very blurry, to something which is crisp, clear, where we have far richer data and far more detail in every experiment we run, because we can collect more data points, because we can be more targeted, and because instead of using simple experiments like high-throughput screening, which are primarily bidding exercises, we can do a far more deeper form of profiling, where for every molecule that goes in, you can get a very rich, detailed data set, which actually contains valuable information, not just in terms of active, inactive, but more in terms of, can we understand what makes this molecule interesting, more interesting, less interesting, and what can we learn from that for the design of the next set of molecules. And as we coming to the end of the presentation, what I think is a very nice case study that indicates how this combination can really work out very, very nicely has been one of our partnerships with in silico medicine, where in this case, in silico medicine has been using its generative reinforcement learning to design a novel set of inhibitors. We've been working together on JAK inhibitors, and where, as counterparts of the dry lab side taken over by in silico in this case, we've been doing validation of predictions, generating the wet lab data, and enabling this feedback loop between data, between design, and between the next set of data, has been enabled by closing this loop with the robotics side and the AI side. So it is a nice example, I believe, which shows how combining the robotics and the AI can really lead to lower costs, can lead to greater novelty, and can also therefore for the companies involved and for pharma companies we're partnering with, can lead to a significant improvement in their drug discovery pipeline and processes. So that's basically an example of the type of partnership that we have been doing with in silico medicine. And if we then basically look at what we've discussed over the past 20-25 minutes, what we can really see is that right now as an industry, we do have the chance to move drug discovery into the digital age. So many other industries have already been transformed by electronics, robotics, the cloud. And drug discovery has for the longest time been quite persistent in doing things in a particular way, where I believe that now is the time when many of these things can change and should change. And in our minds, the combination of AI and robotics as two enabling technologies is highly synergistic and allows us to rethink not just data analysis, but drug discovery data in the first place. And what we're aiming at is, in all of the drug discovery, data-driven drug discovery space, to have an improved quality of data, to reduce the costs, and to make sure we actually have a higher chance of drug discovery success. And I think it's going to be worth doing that, because what we can achieve is ideally bring more treatments to patients. And given kind of my own background also being in the clinical sphere, I think it's very clear we do need these new treatments and we do need the better treatments. So if we can find innovations on the technical side, on the biological side, then it is very much worth implementing those in order to bring these new drugs forward. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. And I'm very glad I've been here today. And I'm very happy for anyone to reach out and to connect and to continue the conversation, the Q&A and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin-Immanuel, for a really interesting talk about Arctoris and your approach and what you sort of add to the drug discovery pipeline.